Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are beaming in from. For those of you here in the virtual room with us, welcome. For those of you on live stream, also welcome. We are really excited to be here today to celebrate three amazing nonprofits that we have had the opportunity and privilege to work with here at NationBuilder over the last kind of 10 years. So why is NationBuilder here? Why are we the people convening? NationBuilder is infrastructure for leaders. We provide the tools of leadership so that people can build a thriving community wherever they are in the world. Today, we are really excited to have three phenomenal nonprofit leaders with us on the stage. We have Erica from Culture AID NOLA. We have Brian from Imagine LA. And we do have another speaker who is beaming in shortly, Lucero from ICAN. We also have the phenomenal Lea Endres, who is NationBuilder's CEO, who is going to be giving us an opening keynote today. Just some house rules before we kind of dive right in. You have the chat on the right-hand side, so please feel free to pop in any questions. And then we will also have an optional networking session after the event where you can kind of come in and pick a table. So with that said, Lea, I'm going to hand the microphone over to you.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Sorsha. And hey, everybody. Welcome to a celebration of giving. I know we officially kicked off giving season with Giving Tuesday a few weeks ago, but for the leaders we're going to hear from today, my version of reality is that giving is their daily reality. They give as a matter of practice, serving their communities in all kinds of ways, big and small. So today we're celebrating them and their teams, their volunteers, members, and donors who regularly make the impossible possible. When I was 15, my whole world was changed because of a nonprofit organization based in Oakland, California. I was an incredibly shy kid who was always nervous to talk to people, not like on stage, but just in normal life, wouldn't even look people in the eye. But that year, I went to a youth-led leadership conference run by a whole bunch of volunteers, and everything changed for me. I found my footing. I think I found my voice. I found a place to stand, and I also started looking people in the eye, which was helpful. After that initial experience, I started volunteering with the organization for years to come, and I hope I was able to give back as much as I received, which is part of why I love nonprofit organizations and why I spent about 20 years working in the nonprofit sector. Being of service to one another is inherently baked into that model. And so is the daily experience of not just giving, but also of receiving. And I think the beauty really comes from the fact that it's often hard to tell who's giving or who's receiving because it's kind of always both. I'm curious if folks were, in the chat, is it the wealthy board member who makes generous contributions, but also reads every word of a board packet and eagerly shows up to every single call, even the optional ones, because the opportunity to be a part of the organization's work dramatically impacts her sense of purpose, meaning, and connection? Is it the retired educator whose budget allows donating $100 once a year to his favorite nonprofit, then eagerly awaits the annual review where he can see his name reflected back to him amongst the names of all the other donors, giving him a sense of belonging? And of course, what about the person who got back on their feet after receiving the support that they needed and later shares their story at the organization's annual fundraiser or in an email or with a new class of volunteers? Giving and receiving are inextricably linked, which is why being asked to contribute our time, our network, our money is a powerful source of community building. And I think, asking for something can be really hard, but asking for money in particular, I think is really hard. So I want to talk and was asked to talk specifically about fundraising for a minute. I remember I remember the first time I asked someone to donate to one of my projects. I was really nervous. I was afraid of offending them, or like making it seem as if that's all I wanted from him. But I did it. I made the ask. And when he said yes, my friend Tim thanked me. And he thanked me for the opportunity to be a part of what I was creating. And I have to say that was pretty mind-blowing. I had been consumed by thinking of the need and the possible impact behind my request of him, but not really about what it would mean for him, how it would bring him closer, not just to the work, but to me. And our friendship deepened in a way that before that moment I couldn't have imagined. And I guess it seems obvious in retrospect that the true power of fundraising is the possibility of building deeper community. But it took years for me to truly understand how powerful it is to invite someone to be closer to you and your organization specifically by making a financial contribution. To think not just about what their money means for your work, but about what your invitation means to them. And that a $15 or $50 donation are often some of the most important and the most meaningful for both the organization and for the person giving. The retired educator that I mentioned earlier is my dad. And while it was really moving when he opened up the annual report to physically show me where his name was amongst the organization's other long-term small donors, I also know how much it would mean to him if that organization called him one day after 20 years, not just to thank him, but to ask him personally, would he like to volunteer? Would he like to come to their next event? Could he consider being a monthly donor? Was there any other way that he could help? Giving is not just about donors or volunteers giving to incredible organizations. It's about incredible organizations giving thousands and thousands of people the chance to be pulled closer, to be part of something, to be part of a community. So if you're sitting on an ask, especially, or a bold one, a really bold one, make it. You never know what it might mean to someone. And if you have something you want to offer, whether that be time or money or ideas or encouragement, please offer it, because you never know what it might mean to someone. So on that note, I think we should do some celebrating. We have some extraordinary leaders here who are giving, and I hope receiving every single day. So Sorsha, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Lea. Yes, we really do have some absolutely phenomenal nonprofit leaders today, and we are starting with Erica Chomsky-Adelson, founder and executive director at the Culture AID NOLA. She has worked in nonprofit disaster response for 12 years with a variety of your organizations. Culture AID NOLA serves 3,000 people a week from 2 neighborhood-based sites, founded on the principles of dignity, grace, and hospitality. The organization is committed to serving all without means testing, breaking down the stigma of hunger. So, Erica, please share with us a little bit about Culture AID NOLA and the work that you do, because I know that those numbers have actually even gotten larger since the last time we spoke.
They have. And first of all, I just want to say, Lea, I was actually taking notes while you were talking. So thank you for those ideas. And as always, it's an honor to do anything with NationBuilder. So Culture AID NOLA is the No Barrier Food Bank here in New Orleans. So what does that mean? Why is that important, that no barrier part? I think a lot of times there's a misconception that if you're hungry and trying to feed your family, you can just go down to the church on the corner and get a can of green beans and be fine for the night. And in most cases, that's not an option for working families. You're going to have to call ahead, make an appointment, pray that they have capacity, bring, proof of income, social security number, ID, utility bill, lease. You can only go once a month to get a certain amount of food. And it's really burdensome, and it makes it really hard for people to ask for help, to ask for what they need. So we believe that everyone deserves good food, no matter their situation, background, documented status. And we host no barrier, open to the public giveaways, currently twice a week, although as Sorsha said, we're in the middle of an expansion. We're serving about 3,000 people, and we concentrate a lot on fresh foods, on fresh produce. We find that people who are cash limited are often also time limited. And so getting to Walmart once a month to get staples is possible, but commuting from a food desert to a proper store every week is just not going to happen for a lot of folks. We can bring that to them in a spirit of community and sharing, it sets people up for lifelong better health outcomes.
Absolutely. So Erica, what is it that attracted you to the work, in particular in New Orleans? Because Culture AID NOLA just started in 2020. So what did that look like, that instant moment?
It was a wild time. As you mentioned, I've been in disaster response for quite some time. So going into COVID right at the beginning when, none of us really knew what was going to happen, I had a pretty good network to call on. We began by rescuing food from restaurants that were closing down. And the first time we went out, we cooked about 500 meals. And we were so excited. We thought that was so much. And it wasn't. So the next time we went out, we cooked about 750 meals. And it was really great. And we helped a lot of people, a lot of families, but it still wasn't enough. So the third week we went out, we served 5,000 meals. And it's kind of just been growing from there. So much of how we show love in New Orleans is through food. And I think we've touched on something really fundamental in how we care for each other.
And Erica, you were able to completely pivot what your organization was focused on when another disaster hit earlier this year with Hurricane Ida. Would you mind just kind of talking us through what that shift from both a in-person and what you were doing, but also that digital component of how you made that shift?
Yeah, I love talking about this. Thank you. I'm so proud of our team. And that's really what made that kind of response and that kind of rapid and impactful shift possible, was the trust that we had built up amongst our team, amongst our longtime volunteers and our donors and our board, all coming together to do what was needed at the moment. So just before Hurricane Ida hit, we started talking to our partners, what obviously we are going to do something. What does that look like? And as we were sitting outside a couple hours after the storm had passed, locally, actually famous chef drove up with a van full of meat and said, "Can you cook it?" And we said yes. So that led to rescuing the coolers and freezers of, I want to say, about 200 some odd restaurants and cooking it. And we were cooking from the sidewalk. We were borrowing grills from people's porches. We were having people, run in from Mobile to bring us to-go containers. We pulled in volunteers from all over the city. And it was a really incredibly, intense and beautiful and terrifying time. But we were able to serve about 40,000 meals in under a week. And then we produced an event called Fill the Fridge, which distributed about 100,000 pounds of groceries in one afternoon, because at that point, power was coming back on. And, after the year we've had in a tourism economy, no one can afford to fill the fridge all at the same time. So NationBuilder was just the backbone of that entire pivot for a couple of reasons. One, our volunteers were very used to the system. So canceling their existing shifts and having them move to emergency shifts was really intuitive for a lot of them. And I think that sign-up process helped us get more volunteers than some other places. We were also able to rapidly flip the information on the website to point towards hurricane-specific resources, which I did not see a lot of other organizations doing. The texting capability helped us keep both our volunteers and the people we serve up to date with the very latest information we had. It was really great. We had 2 staff members that stayed behind to ride out the storm, and we evacuated 2 other staff members. And that turned out to be exactly what we needed to succeed, because all of we didn't have internet, we didn't have power, we had nothing. We were flying completely blind. But our evacuated staff members were able to update the website and to send out text alerts and emails and coordinate volunteer shifts and all these things, because it's so easy to use. It's just so intuitive that it was possible to cross-train on a lot of this and have that backup and that leadership depth. Another thing that really worked well for us during that pivot, after we had finished rescuing restaurant coolers and we moved towards the Fill the Fridge giveaway, all of a sudden we had 250 people sign up to volunteer in a couple of hours after we had made the shift live. And we realized that we were going to be a little overcome with love, and we needed to identify some additional leaders very quickly. So we were able to go into the system and sort by the social capital feature. And that allowed us to very, very quickly figure out who knew what we were doing, who knew how we did things, who was capable of leading others without having to, go down like a massive spreadsheet. We have hundreds of unique volunteer records, and that was a really easy way to make it happen.
Wow. And so, Erica, you've had 12 years in this space. What does the humanity look like right now? Like, how are you seeing a shift in where people are more invested in giving to nonprofits and being a part of what you're trying to build? Like, what does that look like currently for you at Culture AID NOLA?
I think, COVID specifically has been a really interesting time for nonprofits. The veil was kind of lifted off, right? How many of our friends and neighbors are $20 away from disaster, and I think that really opened people's eyes, and the ones who could at the beginning of COVID afford to give definitely gave in significantly higher numbers. And you're going to see that with any disaster. When there's an immediate and obvious need, people do show up for each other. And I think the challenge for nonprofits going into next year will, in a lot of ways, be maintaining that momentum. COVID is not over. In some ways, particularly for us as a mostly tourism-based economy. We're talking about people who did not have $50 saved 2 years ago, and they definitely don't have it now when all of these kind of federal supports are starting to end. And that's what we're kind of looking at, is how do we keep this going? We've built together and with NationBuilder's help, this incredible community. And how do we make that sustainable?
Wow. I have one more question.
Yeah, of course.
So, what is the one piece of advice that you would give to anyone in this room, anyone who's watching on the live stream, if they're sitting here thinking there's a thing I have to do in my community, I have to change, I have to do it? What is that one piece of advice that you would give to someone thinking about making a change?
Yeah. My favorite word in the world is curiosity. And that's a lot of what our organization is based around, our leadership structure, the way that we attempt to relate to our community. So I think for any problem that one can identify or that one is aware of that needs solving, I think the first step is curiosity. Go, ask, learn. Chances are someone wants to help you with this. And that goes to kind of something that Lea mentioned, was that giving is just as powerful as receiving when you ask. And I think it's really important that when we set out to fix the world, we do so with a strong sense of community.
Thank you so much, Erica. For those of you in the event, we will be sharing Erica's information. So if you are compelled to join her wonderful community, please do. And just thank you, Erica, for everything that you're doing.
Thanks, Sarsha.
Of course. All right. So I am going to invite the fantastic Brian to the stage. And there we go. Okay. So we have Brian Rosenbaum, who is the Community Engagement Director at Imagine LA. And Brian serves in that capacity, overseeing strategy and execution of Imagine LA's volunteerism and mentorship program, individual, corporate, and event fundraising, community partnerships, communications, marketing, the annual family fun and fundraising events, system optimization and management, and advocacy efforts. And Imagine LA prevents first-time and repeat homelessness, and it equips families to maintain housing stability and thrive long-term. So hi, Brian, welcome to the stage.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, so what actually attracted you to this work, Brian? What was the thing that made you get involved in the nonprofit space in LA?
Yeah, my favorite thing to do is bring people together under one mission. I've done it since I was a kid. My house was the place where we did our homework and studied for the SATs in high school. And throughout my nonprofit career here in the US, internationally, it's all revolved around bringing people together under a common mission. We can do so much more together. No single person can solve these issues. So in these last decade and a half, I've really found my niche in volunteer management, which in my opinion combines the three most important things we can do in this field, which are building relationships, building systems, and building capacity. The relationships are the foundation of everything we do. Movements are built of communities. Communities are built of relationships. And the systems that we need to actually execute our work are so important. You can have a vision, but a vision is just a dream unless you have a plan. So putting down plans, creating processes, and then capacity, because like I said, no one can do this alone. And when we build the capacity of our staff, of our donors, of our volunteers, we ultimately will hopefully work ourselves out of a job. That's what I've been always told as a social worker, and that's my background. My job is to make sure that I can exit, and that's not to say that any nonprofit is ever going to end. I think that's not the point. It's that we are building the capacity of others to multiply our force and to do so much more. But I should add that I think my own personal passion runs a lot deeper than that. Over the years, coming from an anti-oppressive, anti-racist position, I've really grown to understand my privilege and power and the persistent systemic inequalities, that keep black and brown communities and women and LGBT folks and disabled folks from accessing all the opportunities that I've been given in my life. I grew up on a golf course, and I think I'm kind of bold enough to say it. And now I am called to this work, and I get up every morning to undo that privilege and power in those systems that create unlevel playing fields for myself and others.
Thank you, Brian. So Imagine LA is working with the homeless population in Los Angeles, and we know that during COVID, we saw a spike in that population. And so what did it look like to actively engage the people, one, that you needed to serve, but also those volunteers and those donors? Like, how did that all manifest in 2020?
Yeah, absolutely. The last time we took a homeless count in Los Angeles, we do it every year, was in January 2020, and we skipped it in 2021. Between 2019 and 2020, homelessness in LA increased by 16 in county. Among families, it boomed by 46%. It's a 3.5 times increase, and nobody was talking about it. So in March 2020, sort of on the heels of actually that report hadn't even been released yet. It got released in the summer. But we saw an explosion of volunteer interest, especially coming from online resources like Volunteer Match and LA Works, which is our local Points of Light network. We saw folks even more hungry to get involved. And I'm so proud to say that, with the infrastructure of NationBuilder, we went from a deficit of 15 mentors in March 2020 to now a surplus of 113 mentors waiting for match, and another 66 waiting for training, and a whole pool of them waiting for their phone interviews. People are so hungry to get involved. And like, the greatest joy of my job is giving them the opportunity to do so. And I would point also to a change in the type of hunger that they have. While they are so important, hygiene kits and beach cleanups are not doing it for people anymore. They want transformative volunteerism. They want volunteerism that allows them to change as people. And so our 18-month mentorship program is truly that, both for our mentors and our mentees. I'll paraphrase Father Boyle here in Los Angeles, founder of Homeboy Industries, who says that when we go to the margins and allow those living there to inhabit their own truth, we discover and our dignity and our mutual kinship. And I think that is what we offer when we offer deep, powerful volunteerism. We offer the chance not just to make a difference, but to be changed yourself.
Thank you. I think we lost you a little bit there, but you're coming back in. Brian, the wonders of the internet. And speaking of, that leads me into the next question I have for you, because I know a lot of the work that you do at Imagine LA is convening people. And we were faced with the inability to convene. How did that impact people's ability to feel connected to the work of Imagine LA?
Yeah, it was a struggle. Our mentorship program that used to be fully in person, twice a month, going to the beach or going to the park or the museum or help with a science project or help with a college application, everything went virtual. And it's been incredibly challenging for our mentors and our mentees to connect. But I'm so proud that our mentors have gone above and beyond to meet their families where they're at, working with their schedules, attending our events to pick up supplies for them. Thinking about creative and different ways to celebrate the families, like everyone chipping in and just getting them dinner on a Friday night and delivering that El Pollo Loco, bag to their front door with some morning. But really treating our families just with so much love and care. At the same time, convening our team has been, something that we've leaned into. How do you take care of a nonprofit team where folks are historically struggling with burnout and lack of feeling connected? But our team has, I think, found ways to celebrate each other, lean in even more into appreciation, but also lean into team bonding. So our weekly, Wednesday staff lunches that we do, where we rotate facilitation and someone does a fun activity like trivia. We just did our virtual staff holiday party to make sure everyone stays safe. So taking care of each other, it's really all about care and togetherness.
Absolutely. So when you think about the giving infrastructure that we've seen, and I know Lea touched on it earlier around Giving Tuesday, were there specific areas throughout the past 2 years during the pandemic where you saw kind of an inflection of people wanting to donate either financially or with their time? And was Giving Tuesday a big part of that for Imagine LA?
That's a good question. In March, we spun on a dime and decided to raise a ton of money for our family emergency and investment fund. It's for emergencies. It's when the lights need to stay on or rent needs to get paid. Also for investments. If you need a laptop to apply for jobs and work remotely, let's get you a laptop. If you need driving lessons so that you can drive to your essential job, let's make sure that you learn how to drive. We, as I said, spun on a dime, launched a campaign to increase that fund, which had previously had a cap of $1,000 per family. We raised $160,000 in 4 months to increase that level to $3,000 per family, so we could truly take care of them, make sure that not a single family was pushed back into homelessness as we were setting kids up for remote learning and approaching the summer, where we knew that kids and moms were going to be home alone. 86% of our families are run by single moms, so it's largely sort of women-led single households, to set them up with games and earbuds so these kids can be on their computers and on their phones and having fun together and bonding as we went through that first, hump of quarantine. For us, Giving Tuesday has never been a super strong approach, but this year, because we could not hold our annual Imagine Ball, our big celebrity-studded fundraiser, we launched a fundraising campaign in early November that we're calling Just Imagine, asking people to just imagine the impact that their dollars can make. A huge part of the success of this has been a peer-to-peer fundraising strategy, which we have never done as an org. I've done it a million times in my career, but we haven't done it here. And so we brought in our champions, we brought in our board members, we set them up with individual giving pages. We built the outreach toolkit. We gave them all the tips and tools and tricks and custom support to reach out and activate their networks. And so far that is projected to bring in $200,000, which is going to be 10% of our operating budget this year.
Wow. Peer-to-peer. That's a personal favorite of mine. That's so exciting to hear, Brian. Okay, well, wrapping out with a similar question, but what is that one piece of advice that you would give to anyone who is thinking to start something to help their community?
You bet. I'm going to be a little contrarian here. I'm going to say don't do it.
Ooh.
Don't do it.
Tell us more.
In California alone, we have 30,000 nonprofit organizations. If you are passionate about making a difference, wherever it is, please do not try to start your own organization. Aside from the fact that it's hard and complicated, and I know you're going to say, but I can do it. Bring your passion and skills and your networks and resources to an organization already addressing the causes that you care about. Spend some time learning from the folks doing the work. Bring that curiosity, like Erica mentioned, so you can understand the issue, build your skill set, grow your network, contribute to the work. What we need is collaboration, not competition. Additionally, we know how many startups fail in the first couple of years. And the risk of that is not just that you fail and your nonprofit goes under. The real risk is that the clients you serve will have another organization quit on them. Our communities have suffered too much disappointment. Please bring your skills and passion to someone doing the work so you can learn from them, build your base. And then when you know that you're filling a niche that absolutely nobody else is filling, go ahead, start your nonprofit. It is hard. You can do it, but I think there's so much work already happening. Let's embrace and build upon what we're already doing rather than try to create new stuff from scratch.
Thank you. Thank you for your honesty, Brian. It's a thing that not many people would say, so I really appreciate it. Awesome. Okay, we are heading into our last speaker of today, and I am going to find her in the lovely tech world and pop her on our screen so we can see her. Okay, and Brian, I'm going to pull you over there. Okay, hello, Lucia. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. I hope my connection is stable. I'm calling in from Ecuador, and when the weather changes, so does the connection. So, hoping for the best.
Well, sending you the good Wi-Fi vibes. So let me just share a little bit about you today. So we have Lucero here, who is the digital campaign coordinator for ICAN. ICAN is the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, and it is a coalition of non-governmental organizations promoting adherence to and implementation of the United Nations Nuclear Weapon Ban Treaty. So up first question for you. Tell us how you got into this work. What was the thing that drew you to actively being a part of the ICAN community?
So I first heard of ICAN while I was working in Australia with Greenpeace. I'd come much more from the climate movement, from that kind of organization, a larger nonprofit, working on a whole bunch of different topics. I myself have a background in forest and nature conservation. It was much more the sciences. I decided that I really loved the communication about ecology and how to protect our planet and working on climate change. And there's always been a big range of issues around social justice that I've cared about. And nuclear weapons, I think, was an issue that as a child, I'd been very aware of, and then it dropped off the radar a bit. But it's always something which instinctively you think, how can that still be a thing? That is awful. We are all at risk. And when I was in Australia, it had been just after the organization received the Nobel Peace Prize because of the work it had done to achieve this treaty. So one of the things that was mind-blowing to me is that for 50 years, the UN, which was founded on the principle of a little bit of a never again of everything that happened in World War II, was unable to get a treaty in place that would directly prohibit nuclear weapons. It was able to be negotiated for landmines, for chemical weapons, for weapons of mass destruction. We have a stigma and we have a ban in place because these are not the ways that we want to interact with each other, just put it in a horrible way, but it's not the way we want to do things as humanity, right? It puts everyone at risk. So nuclear weapons escaped that structure due to the power dynamics involved for a really long time. But what we saw, and that was part of the work that ICAN had committed itself to, was to shifting the debate to saying, okay, we are going to stop talking about nuclear weapons only as a tool of power. We're going to talk about what they actually do, about the communities that are impacted by uranium mining, by nuclear testing, what the situation of the people who survived the use of nuclear weapons in Japan was actually like. What were their experiences? How were their lives damaged, not only then, but in the decades that followed? Because that's one of the horrifying things about radiation, is that the impacts cross generations. It goes into the fourth and fifth generations as well. So shifting the story into that and working together with governments and parliamentarians and trying to get countries to speak up and say, you know what, we have processes to make sure that there's no more proliferation of nuclear weapons, but we need to go even further, and we need to ban them, and we need to stigmatize them, so that we can also shift the money out of them, and we can make sure that there is public pressure on governments to take action. That shift has been happening over the past 10 years, and it resulted in 2017 in this treaty. And the hope that that gave people working on this issue was incredible. But one of the things that made me take a step back was that the fact that if we hadn't known this through the Greenpeace network, because there's obviously also people working on nuclear issues, I wouldn't have heard of it necessarily. And I asked a few people around, and they also said, "Oh, really? There's a treaty. How cool. I hadn't heard." And I kind of thought, this is, I mean, it's an incredible achievement. But it's one that is been led from a lot of different organizations all around the world, working directly with the stakeholders involved so that it could pass, right? And now we need to shift into this kind of groundswell moment where we shift public opinion and we make people realize that this is still such a crucial issue, and that we now have a pathway forward, right? And that was something that just really excited me. And then it turned out that they had a job opening, so I was just like, I will move anywhere. Please hire me. And that's how I ended up there doing digital campaigning, which is the stuff I love to do.
Absolutely. So I heard you talk there about finding the stories and grounding what you're doing to reach people in story. What does that look like? How do you find those people? How do you build relationships with them to ultimately attract the general populace to be able to have the conversation about very complex global issues that ICAN is tackling every day?
So to be honest, I think one of the strengths of this campaign is that there wasn't a lot we had to kind of build up from scratch ourselves, because the survivors have been there at the forefront of this movement from the moment we said go. The Hibakusha in particular from Japan, the survivors of the nuclear weapons use, have been one of the most outspoken communities about the horrors that these weapons do. But so have the communities impacted by testing, so have communities impacted by uranium mining, which happens all over the world. And there has been such a long history in this movement, right? We're not saying that what ICAN is doing is like the first time someone spoke up about this. It's been building up for 70 years, but we were taking what was there and the relationships that were there, and we were able to work together towards something. And obviously, we are always building up new networks and trying to strengthen relationships. Just 2 weeks ago, we co-hosted together with one of our Japanese partners a global survivors forum. To bring together, to give people the opportunity to share their stories. And this was done online, ideally, because next year there's a big meeting about our treaty. We would have loved to have an opportunity to have everybody get ready in person. But the pandemic is what it is. So we decided to make it online and to make it public and to make it permanently accessible, so that it's a resource as well. So that whenever someone is talking about, hey, nuclear weapons testing has a real impact, they have someone's stories that they can refer to. And it's not just the stories of, well, this was done to me. It's, this is how I fought back. And in reality, this is what my community needs right now. We need remediation of this site. We need compensation for the health effects of this. One of the stories that we were recently trying to document is a mother-daughter combination who were telling us, particularly in the context of the United States, kind of how in New Mexico, people aren't recognized as having been impacted, even though the tests, the radiation, the fallout from the first ever nuclear tests at Trinity did reach these communities, and they're called the downwinders, but they don't get the support they need. Some do, but not all. And then we spoke to veterans in the UK who were saying, well, UK Army veterans who were basically just told to show up for these tests in the Pacific or in other places, if they were kind of told to participate in the US tests, then they get compensation through the US. But in the UK, they get nothing. And so seeing how disparate it is all over the world, right? How can people in Algeria apply for compensation in France? How can people in Australia get, these kind of support? And the thing is, for nuclear armed states, it's not convenient to talk about this too much. So as the rest of the world, we need to be talking about it. We need to be uniting the demands, but also uplifting each individual demand where we can. And that's what ICAN tries to balance. We're not taking their stories and making it ours only for our goal. We're trying to make sure that when we ask people to join the work we're doing, that they also have an opportunity to really use it for their own, the own things they are pushing for.
So you obviously are a global nonprofit, and we've heard today from New Orleans and Los Angeles. What does it actually look like to manage supporters and donors and volunteers when you have a global footprint?
Chaos. No, I mean, we're incredibly lucky in the sense that when the pandemic started, we were already used to working online, largely, right? It was something which we had to do regularly. Of course, the in-person component is incredibly valuable. When you're trying to convince a parliamentarian to put a motion in their Congress or their parliament asking for the country to support the treaty, in person will get you much further than a Zoom call when you're meeting with the UN at the top levels, right? Having these opportunities to interact, but also internally as a campaign, we have 600 partner organizations. And yes, we have a wonderfully active email list that exists from ages ago, and then people participate in, and we ask that people share their good news. And there's periods where lots will be coming, and there's periods where it's slightly quieter, not because nothing's happening, but because people get shy or it doesn't feel as important in the big rush of things, right? So how do you maintain that sense of community? And for us, one of the things we decided was really important, because we had a few key milestones, was to just organize all hands meetings and to say, okay, here's our Zoom. We've maxed out the capacity on this. Whoever wants to join can. And we're going to talk about our strategy for this upcoming event, for example, the 75th anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and what could all ICAN partners be doing? This is what ICAN, as the central organization, as the ones organizing things, are doing. But you're always open to take your own framing and to take your own story and to nationalize it. But you know what? We don't want you just to hear from us. We want you to talk with each other. Yeah. And one of the cool things that I really loved seeing was that when the treaty entered into force, so the treaty was adopted in 2017, and earlier this year, we got the 50 countries on board needed for the treaty to enter into force, thereby making it international law, right? So nuclear weapons since 2021 are banned under international law. And that was a giant milestone, and we were so excited to celebrate it with everyone. So we organized these calls ahead of time saying, hey, what are you doing? And one of the connections that I loved most that popped up was someone saying, have you thought about lighting up specific things, like just putting light projections on things? And then there were people saying, well, in the UK, we're doing this. Oh, we're doing this in Denmark. And then there were just really practical conversations as well of like, I have a contact who can get us, I think it's a spire on Times Square. There's a spire in New York that we can get that lit up. And, like those kind of conversations happening, while the other conversation was also top line about like, we have funding, let us help you. Right? We are making grants available to our partners. If you can tell us, like, just easy. Again, we're asking you to give your time and to make a project. We want to support that, so we don't want you to spend all your time on reporting, right? All of these things, we were facilitating that. But while we were talking, people were just connecting with each other, and it was magical. And similarly, when the news broke that it was happening, we just had everyone, here's the good news. We're on this Zoom call. Join us. We'll celebrate. Right. And it was champagne. And then it was people in Australia with coffee, and it was people in tears, and it was people euphoric. And it was wonderful. And it was this sense of community, which we would have loved to have in the room. Some of the videos I love most from the campaign are people cheering in UN meeting rooms where it doesn't happen usually. Right. These are very serious affairs. So, yeah, I think the internet with us, it wouldn't have been possible otherwise.
Yeah. So what does the day in the life of the digital campaign coordinator, what's like when you're going in, are you creating campaigns for each country? What does that actually look like from a day-to-day perspective?
So that's one of the things that obviously the coordination role is, right? Each country has their own priorities. It's very different what we need to do in specific NATO countries, and even between them, it differs, whether it versus countries that are already in the process of ratifying, of getting their countries and their parliaments involved, and just getting the right instrument saying we agree to join this treaty to the UN. So there's a lot of emailing people back and forth that are on our direct contacts. But there's also this idea that we want to be communicating this success and this feeling of momentum at all times to our supporters. So it's getting social media that kind of shares all of our progress, right? And we've gotten quite good at that. We like to think of just being like, hey, here's a win. Like it can be smaller, it can be big, but here's something we did and it's an impact. And then it's also about giving people resources, right? So actually just yesterday, we work with a kind of template style because our pages are so flexible that we create microsites for people who want to campaign on a specific subtopic.
Wow.
The issue of nuclear weapons is so big. So we break it down. Do you want to get your city involved? Do you want your bank to stop investing? Do you want to get your parliamentarians to do something? Because the ask and the steps are different. And in fact, it's always going to be different in each country. But here are some resources. Here are letters you can write. Here are inspiration from other cities, right? And we're always working to kind of make sure that that is up to date and that we can reach out to people who have indicated to us before that they're interested in a specific topic. So one of the cool things that I've kind of enjoyed seeing grow from NationBuilder has been our report around universities in the US that are involved in nuclear weapons production. And watching people sign up to say, I am an alumni of this university, or I am currently studying here, or I am teaching here, and I want to make sure we kind of are involved in or either get out completely or are working more on the disarmament side or are exposing at least the fact that this, our university is profiting off these government contracts. And we started with a report that we published, a microsite. We asked people to join, and then we started building up on that specific list, just using the tags, sending more resources, and then obviously putting each other in touch. And they've developed much more informal networks, but they meet regularly. Wow. And they kind of start working on specific campaigns. And one of the things I loved seeing was in January, when the treaty entered into force, just people showing up with banners despite the pandemic at their different universities and at different production companies and at banks and at all of these things, because people knew they had the tools. And then they just went and they did their own celebration event, and we just got the photos and we were able to share them out. And that's what I love seeing.
Truly putting people at the center. Wow. Okay, last question. It won't be different, I promise. What would you recommend for anyone who is thinking about starting a change in their community? What's the one piece of advice you would give?
I feel quite intimidated after the great ideas that I've also already heard, but I think it's honestly just talking to more people. And trying to hear kind of why it would make such a difference. I think what drew me to ICAN and before to Greenpeace, right, it's seeing the fact that like people-powered campaigns are really so like they're the ones that are driving so much change, and you're not going to be able to do it alone. And maybe as Brian said, right, someone's already working on it. Maybe they're not, but you're still going to need the community to do it. One of the things I love seeing now that I'm back in Ecuador is that everything moves through WhatsApp. It's ridiculous. And whether you want to get a hairdresser's appointment or you want to get a cab or you want to get food or you need something from the hospital, it's all via WhatsApp. And WhatsApp groups have a power of movement to get stuff done. If it's disaster relief, if it's getting people who are stuck somewhere out, like all that kind of stuff also moves through there. So you need to know where the stakeholders in the issue that you care about, where they're talking to each other. Because that's the only way where we have a tendency to want to overcomplicate things, right? And a tool like NationBuilder on the one hand is magical because it helps you simplify once you've trained up people.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And if it's intuitive and if you can kind of do these things, but sometimes we're also like, I need a system, or you could just use WhatsApp. Right. And making that conversation, having that, and then growing to scale is I think a good first step. So yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, all of you. Okay. Do any of our speakers have questions for each other? And then I would love to hear from the audience. And that is unprepared. So no worries if you don't have questions for each other. But yeah, does anyone? Oh, yes, go for it. Mic is yours. You're still pinned. Perfect. You're still.
Yeah, no. So I actually had a question both for Erica and for Brian, because from us, the volunteering setup and how to get people involved, it can be a bit less tangible than what you're doing. But I would love to hear kind of when you were starting up, what were the kind of frequency you were asking people to participate in? How did you start building up your volunteer network? We've had enough people who've told us, I want to do something, and we're trying to figure out what that ask is. But we also need to figure out what the process is to make that efficient and scalable and make them feel like we're delivering on letting them participate.
It's a really excellent question. Brian, do you mind if I start? Thanks. I think for us, it's a couple of things. As an organization, one of the things that we're focused on is breaking down the stigma around hunger. And one of the ways that we do that is by having music and DJs at every food distribution we do to make it more of a community event for the people who come to us asking for help. But on the flip side, that also is more fun for volunteers. We're a music-loving place, and for quite some time, we were, the best gig in town. So that definitely helped during COVID to be able to give people an in-person opportunity. And it definitely didn't hurt that we work outside, that we provide masks. We're now providing rapid tests to our volunteers. We've done vaccinations on site. We've been very, very tight on COVID safety. And I think that built a lot of trust with the people who come out with us to serve others. I think, Lea mentioned earlier that the giving is just as important as the receiving for a lot of people, that it builds that sense of community. And I think offering people a very, very tangible, very direct, and in a sense, kind of complete way to help. You get there, you take the food, you pack the food, you hand off the food, you put the tables away. It's a full cycle in each shift.
I love that. I love the idea of making it intentional and meaningful from like the micro and the macro. I will say that over the Thanksgiving break, I read this. You can see it, Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. It's my new Bible. I the marginalia in here is, this thing is more ink of mine than ink that was printed. But one of her big theses is that you have to make it meaningful, that every interaction is a chance for meaning making, from the invite to the title of the event, right? It's not just volunteer event. How do we add spark to it? How do we make it maybe even a little controversial and allow people to take a stand? One of the big things she talks about is, don't be afraid to ruffle some feathers. What we're doing is feather ruffling, right? If you're not angry, you're not paying enough attention, kind of thing. And making it meaningful, again, for the volunteers. Are we building meaning making, not just through sort of icebreakers, but through inclusion activities? Are we asking people to dig and be a little bit vulnerable, so that vulnerability and then trust builds connection, and connectivity builds cohesion for your team that's going to grow and grow and grow. And then even to the closeout and to the post communications and to the asks afterwards, right? Are we sending out surveys to make sure that we did the best thing we could during this event? Are we asking people for the feedback about what they'd like to see next time, or a new idea that they have to bring, or a connection that they want to help you make? That's idea number 2 for you, is the idea of force multipliers. Everybody in your organization is part of other organizations. They're part of a faith community. They're part of a book club. They're part of their business. Someone recently asked me, for corporate banking volunteers, do you tag them to their company, or do you tag them as individual hours? And I said, well, if you're working at Wells Fargo today, you could work at Chase tomorrow. Like that. These are individuals who are part of networks. So let's engage them as individuals, but don't ignore the fact that they're part of bigger communities. So how can they become force multipliers? How can they do a snowflake and fractal out to connect to 3 people who connect to 3 more people who connect to 3 more people? And I think the final piece that I'm thinking about from a volunteer perspective, and you're in the advocacy world, so it's a lot harder. What you're doing is not often super tangible. But in my past work doing that, it's make it easy. Create those action alerts that allow someone to email their senator and just set up the roads so that they drive without a single speed bump, without a single pothole. Like make it as easy as humanly possible for people to do it, and then make it shareable, right? So once they do it, how can they share that on social media? How can they email 3 friends? How can you help them figure out the 3 friends that they want to email? And it's really ultimately comes down to relationships. People will do it because they love the work, but also because they love you and they trust you, and you've equipped them to be change makers, and they believe in you, and then they believe in themselves.
Thank you all. That was fantastic. Any other questions? Audience, speakers? Okay. Well, thank you, truly. I personally feel inspired. Brian, I'm going to take your advice and find an organization, not start one. Curiosity, Erica. Oh, absolutely. And truly just listening to people. Thank you. All 3 of you have really, really just made my afternoon. And thank you for giving your time to us today. Like I said, you will get information on each organization in a follow-up email from me. And thank you everyone for being here. Enjoy the holiday season and the season of giving. Have a great day, everyone.